Hi everybody, Steve here. This is just a very, very quick, just working through the course structure and what we'll be doing in each week. So in the first week, we're just really sort of asking, what is an adaptation? What are the problems of defining something as an adaptation? We'll be looking at the Spike Jonze film adaptation, which is kind of a perfect film in a way in an adaptation course. It's a film that talks directly about the process of adaptations and the problems of actually adapting a particular work. The thing about all of the readings, all the films that we're looking at, is that they are self-reflexive in that way of they're aware that they're an adaptation, and they often speak about themselves as a direct adaptation of the source that they're adapting. There's no reading for the first week, so don't feel that you have to have done any of the readings, but I do recommend that you get reading on Thomas Leitch's reading, which is the set reading for week 2, because that will sort of be the basis of all of the assessments. You'll need to be applying his modes to each all of the assessments, so it's important that you sort of get your head around that. And then in week 2, which is the 10 fallacies of adaptation theory, I'll be working through Leitch's different modes of adaptation. Okay, I didn't do that in the first week because I just thought it might be a bit overwhelming to do it all in the first week. So I'll be doing that in the second week, and that's the reason why I'm playing Romeo plus Juliet, the Baz Luhrmann film, which Thomas Leitch thinks is kind of the perfect model for his 10 modes of adaptation, because he says that Romeo and Juliet sort of applies to each mode, or each mode applies to Romeo and Juliet. So we'll be looking at Romeo and Juliet in week 2, and in the lecture I'll be sort of working through his chapter. We can also do that in the class. Week 3, there is no screening because it's the Labor Day public holiday. So what we'll be doing in the classes that week is just kind of working through this first assessment, where we have to actually apply the 10 modes of adaptation theory. Week 4, we're going to look at the novella adaptation. How do you actually adapt a novella to a film? Now, the novella adaptation, that's probably the longest reading that you have in this course, so you might want to sort of get reading earlier. There's really that's the first creative reading for the course, so you've kind of got 3 weeks just leading into that just to read it, so get reading of that pretty early. The Innocents is a tremendous film. It's really, really, really wonderful. And Henry James is The Turn of the Screw, which has been adapted a couple of times, and I can talk about that. And that will be the first week of the tutorial class discussions. What we're going to do is get you in groups. Please look at the assessment lecture for that. And basically, it's just about kind of working through the adaptation of that week, and also just thinking of Leitch's 10 different modes and maybe applying them to the films if you see that would be appropriate. Then we've got a mid-semester break, which comes at a really ridiculous time. It's only 4 weeks in, and then through week 3 we don't even have a film. It's a really muddled way, but we can't really do anything about that. The reason why the mid-semester break is there is because of Easter. Right, then we've got 2 weeks on sort of what I've called gendered adaptation, and what I'm really interested in is in the first week we've got so James Franco, the actor, he's very prolific, and he's written a book, and the book has a lot of short stories. And Gia Coppola, who is I think a nephew of Francis Ford Coppola, and she's definitely a Coppola. She has adapted his short stories into this film, Palo Alto, and I'm really interested in the whole idea of somebody of the other gender adapting the work, and what does that actually do to the gender of the characters that are being written for, and what does it do? It doesn't do anything. James Franco had one proviso for his work being adapted, and that was that a female had to adapt his work, because he felt a male wouldn't do a very good job of his work. So I'm kind of interested in that whole idea of gender in adaptation. And it's probably not an area that's looked at enough, I don't think. Then the following week, we're going to sort of look at the opposite, right? So we're going to look at Daphne's, really wonderful Don't Look Now, a short story, and how Nicholas Roeg adapted that. So it's sort of the opposite way. You've got a female writer being adapted by a male, and what actually happens to particular sensibilities when that happens. So I'm kind of interested in those questions around gender and adaptation. So there's 2 weeks devoted to that. Then we've got poem adaptation. So I'm looking at Allen Ginsberg's famous Howl. Now, with the reading that week, there's not actually words to read. What I'm actually going to give you is a clip to YouTube, and it's basically Allen Ginsberg in 1955 reading his own poem. And the whole question about poetry is poetry actually meant to be read, or is it meant to be performed? And I'm really kind of interested with starting with Howl as an adaptation, Allen Ginsberg actually adapting his own words, his own poem, and then there's a film. So the film is actually on the writing of the poem and all the controversy that the poem caused. If you know anything about the poem, um, you will know that it was banned and there was a court case and it was a big kind of deal in the mid 50s. So the whole film is basically on that, and it's also on the writing of the poem, which I think is really interesting. The following week is, again, we've got no screening because of Anzac Day. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the final assessment in that week because there'll be no reading. Then we've got auteur adaptations. How does an auteur adapt? And the thing about an auteur is the auteur wants to be the big central voice. They don't want to seem like a collaborator often. And Alfred Hitchcock was a good case study of this. You know, it was Alfred Hitchcock's way, and he really wanted to overshadow the author. So I'm kind of interested in that. But the paradox of Hitchcock is he was so invested in the structure and the style and the tone and the mood of what he was adapting that it was all sort of talked the way that he had no interest in what he was adapting. So I'm kind of interested in the whole idea of the auteur and adaptation, and how a lot of auteurs are actually very, very prolific adapters. So the next 2 weeks after that, I'm actually looking in at the whole idea of the picture adaptation and what happens with the picture adaptation. So we've got the children's book adaptation, so Where the Wild Things Are, and we've got Spike Jonze again. Not that I'd never meant to have 2 Spike Jonze films in the course, but he's so interesting with his adaptations, I couldn't sort of resist but put 2 in there. So Where the Wild Things Are, which is really interesting because you're taking a children's book, but then what Spike Jonze is doing is he's adapting a children's book, but the real question about that is it's really a book for adults. So he's actually taking a children's book and making it a book that probably suits adult sensibilities more than children's sensibilities, but we can talk about that. So I'm interested in the whole idea of what happens when a picture story becomes a film. It's turned into moving pictures. And the following week, we're looking at the comic strip adaptation, right? And again, that's really interesting. And there's a very young Scarlett Johansson in that film. When was it made? It was made in 97. No, it wasn't. It was made in 2001. But she just seems a lot younger because I guess she was a lot younger then. I forgot she was actually in the film. Anyway, I'm babbling here. And then the final week is canonical adaptation, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and what's actually going on when you take something as famous as that short story and you adapt it, and what Fincher is actually doing. And again, it's another case of that picture and what he's actually doing with the visual image of adaptation. Okay, so that's all the weeks. That's what we'll be doing in each week. I think it's a pretty good course. If I do say so myself, there should be something there for everyone, I'm hoping. And the most important thing of these weeks is that it generates a lively and robust class discussion. Okay, I'll leave it there.